We're so appreciative that Joe has a platform to be able to allow people like myself and others who've benefited from what you've created. And so we'll be telling this story forever.
Well, my problem is I can't believe I'm 92 years old.
Did you not expect to hit that number, or you feel a lot better than that?
That's an old man. But it doesn't fit me.
I understand.
I can't get it through my head that I'm 92 years old because I don't feel or think 92 years old.
And that's good. That's a blessing, though.
Yes, but it's also a negative because I'm getting old, so I feel like I'm in my 60s.
For you, 90's the new 60, and that's pretty good.
Well, I mean, he eats like a rabbit. I mean, you've been eating like a rabbit for 30 or 40 years. Still do. I mean, literally, vegetables, like prepared ever since I've known him, he's always been focused on his health. I always figured that, you were so successful, you wanted to enjoy this as long as possible, but he's always been focused on nature and focused on his health. I remember he would hold dinners at his home when you completed your sales training class. So the U.S. Surgical Sales Training class was incredibly rigorous, okay? It was 6 weeks straight, no weekends, 6 weeks of pure study, stress, milestones, accomplishment. There was no resting. And when you graduated, or let's say for those who got through it,
Survived.
you had the honor of going to Mr. Hirsch's residence for a dinner. And I remember everyone being so nervous and sitting around this table, and there's this piece of vegetable and like a grape. And we're looking at this, and this is what he's eating. And people are so nervous, they're grabbing their fork and their knife and they're cutting the grape because they're like, they're trying to. But he's always been incredible. That's why 92 for me, I am not surprised, and I'm looking for many more years because he's lived a very clean, healthy life.
Would you believe I weigh today exactly what I weighed 40 years ago?
And that's really healthy, too.
Yeah.
Meaning you were always fit. I saw the pictures, and you and I first met in 1992 is when I first met Lee. And same body type, same fitness, even back then. And the pictures I've seen.
Oh yeah, always.
The horseback
Always.
riding, the skiing. I mean, you mentioned the outdoors, right?
And always connected to nature. So we met when I was about 12 years old. We had a knock at the front door. So my mother opens the door, and I'm standing next to her, and there's Mr. Hirsch. And he says, hello, my name is Leon Hirsch. I own a $50 million company, and I just bought all the property behind your house. And my mother looks at me and looks at him and goes, come on in. And that was the beginning of something that was transformative for me.
Yeah.
I had the pleasure of learning and seeing the real Mr. Hirsch before the Mr. Hirsch.
Because there was that rock star era that it started, and then it just went from there, right?
Right.
So you saw it in the earlier days.
Well, I saw the man first.
Yeah.
I saw
do you remember my dog, Sam?
Yes.
We had a dog. It was a combination of a cross between a shepherd and a police dog and a couple of other things, but a big husky guy. And we had these dinners that Joe was talking about, and we'd be sitting around my living room. And Sam, maybe you remember this, Sam would go and sniff each person, and he'd get to this guy, and he'd go, "Rah," and go to the next one. And son of a gun, that guy never made it.
Really?
I mean, Sam was better than the best recruiter.
So you didn't need rancor.
That's right. Remember him? Yeah. But it used to scare the hell out of me. But that's actually what he would do.
That's hilarious. So 12 years old was your first interview with Leon.
It was my first exposure. Yeah, and I had the pleasure of getting to know him through the years, and then when it was my time, he gave me a chance to come into the company.
Yeah.
And it changed my life. It changed our family. It was a great honor,
Yeah.
and it's still living. It's living in me today. It's living in so many people of what he created.
What was it about Lee, and what was it about the culture at US Surge that you think so many of the ex-Surgelites, I think, remember and want to find again? What was it?
It was simply a maverick leadership style of there's no problem we can't solve, and a constant desire to solve the unsolvable problem, to make the investment, to take the risk, and to do it quickly. What Mr. Hirsch always believed in was the power of the individual. I remember one day when he fired a VP of marketing that I had reported to. And he brought us all into a room. And he said, for the meantime, you'll be reporting to me until I have a replacement. But let me tell you, I don't believe in teams. He said, teams don't make decisions. A person makes a decision. And what he meant was, of course, teams have to interact. But when you feel you can get lost in this bureaucracy and you don't have to be accountable, he always believed in the power. He wanted to empower someone, and he wanted to find the best talent. And so we had a lot of turnover. We had people who couldn't survive that pressure. And we didn't typically have a lot of bureaucracy under us, and it was, you had to make something happen, you had to live it, you had to own it, and then you'd have to get called to his office and look at him in the eye whether it succeeded or failed. But you always knew that he was so passionate about solving problems for physicians that would improve patient outcomes, and he would never let a barrier get in his way. And so it became an inspiring environment. It became an environment where if you liked being on the spot and you liked solving problems, you would succeed. And of course you succeed through teams and process and organizational development. He doesn't not believe in that, but it's the excellence in people that create that. And I think you look at a lot of my colleagues, they always go back to those days because so much was asked of us and the pressure was so high and the reward was so high. And the reward was being in an environment where you could do that instead of just having a job and going home.
And Lee, did that just come out of your head again too?
Yeah.
Really? But you had to pick it up on the ball field or in school or your parents, and you had shared me the earlier days as a salesperson, but where did that come from?
I think, and I've given this a lot of thought, I think things are inherent, and I'm a real firm believer that when I was 7 years old, my mom took me to Florida, and there was a kid selling newspapers in front of the hotel. And I remember I said to him, let me help you. So he gave me a batch of newspapers, and there I was, 7 years old, selling newspapers on the street in Miami. And my mother came looking for me and had a hemorrhage. But it was in me, I wanted to do something like that. I remember in the days that Franklin Roosevelt was president, I had a fit because he promulgated the thought of capping, and I was a young kid then, of capping wages at income at $25,000. I don't know if you remember that. But Roosevelt wanted to introduce a bill that capped wages at income at $25,000. And I had a fit. And I was a young kid then. It just felt to me wrong.
The favorite Joe DeVivo story you could share.
No, don't do it.
What would it be?
Oh, I don't know.
You can give me two if you want to.
He's dangerous next to me. Joe must have been, what, 14, 12, somewhere around there, 12, 14. And as he had said earlier, he lived in a piece of property that like a finger stuck into my property. And right next to his property, right on the line, was a pond. And this pond had bass in it. And one day, I was walking around, and there I found 3 bass on the lawn. He swears to this day he didn't catch them. But we've been having this argument for 40 years.
He's such a nature lover. He has a name for every fish in his waters. I'm not a fisherman, but I don't want to break his heart. He thinks I did it, you know, but no, I didn't.
So
do
forever you're going to be 3 Bass Joe.
Yeah, right, right.
But that's an honor from Lee to you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But the important thing is, despite him stealing 3 of my fish, we still gave him a job. I mean, that's generosity.
That's your forgiveness.
That's real generosity.
That's your forgiveness.
Joe, do you want to return the favor in your favorite Lee Hirsch story?
Sure. There's so many, I don't know if they're favorites, but this is one that always stuck with me. I remember one day I was summoned to his office. And Sue lets me go in, and I'm standing in front of his desk. And there's nothing on his desk except for 2 pieces of 8.5 by 11 paper. And it's double spaced, and he's staring at this thing for a while.
Didn't look up?
Didn't look up. And I'm standing there for an uncomfortable while. He has not yet acknowledged my presence. And so finally he looks up and he says, "Oh, I just wanted to know on the forecast for this summer, was it 10 or 15,000 for this or that or whatever?" And I'm like, "Oh, sir, it's 15,000." And he goes, "Oh, okay." And he goes back to his paper. So at this point, I'm completely unsatisfied, right? Because I was waiting there all this time, and he just wanted this simple answer, you know. So I asked him, you know, I said, "What are you working on?" And he goes, "I'm working on a sales pitch." Because on Monday, we're launching this product, and he's toiling over the nomenclature. And I made the terrible decision to ask. I literally said, "Mr. Hirsch, you're CEO of a billion-dollar company. Why are you toiling on this sales pitch?" And he looks up at me in complete disgust that I would even ask this question. And he said to me, "On Monday, 1,000 people are going to be selling this product. And the words that come out of their mouth have to be perfect." And that always stuck with me, is the perfection and understanding. When we went through our sales training, the reason why it was so rigorous was because we were in clinical situations. And at that time, way early in the day, our salespeople had to actually give technical and clinical support because those infrastructures didn't exist during that day. We were changing surgery, we were changing behaviors. And we had to be trained to literally memorize, because I remember as a young man going through training, I always fought this. I thought it was silly. You're going to make me memorize something I don't bring any value? But the truth is, the moment you get into that high pressure situation and you're hearing the beep and you're in the OR and you're starting to sweat, you always, when you're blacking out from being so nervous,
Go back to your training.
you all go back to training. And you all remember, and I can't tell you how many times the words that he wrote came out of my mouth. And so it always sat with me, the attention to detail, the necessity to train, and the excellence that you demand of your people, and how much that has to be driven from the top. So,
And you mentioned that environment of training the salesperson to be clinical, and today people are like, well, of course, that was never done before.
never done.
And so that can't be lost on those who are younger to this industry. That was unheard of, is taking a salesperson, because originally you did it, you had the nurses, but they couldn't cover, right?
Well, that was developed by Tori Josephson. And what happened was she worked with, she was a secretary. And in those days, when she first started working for us, we would work at Lincoln Hospital Animal Lab. And Dr. Steichen, who was one of Ravitch's residents at the time, would work in the lab. And one day she said to me, could I come up and see what you guys are doing? I said, sure, if you want to. So we went up there, and typical Lincoln Hospital, the technician didn't show up to work with him. So he said, do me a favor, hold this instrument, do that, do that. And she was working with the guy. She'd never been in a lab in her life. Well, when we got done, he said, she's got good hands, what they call hands, the surgeon. Could she work for me? He said, it's up to her. So she started working for him and actually worked with him on all the development of the new products. And when we made our first sales, they were made to friends of either Steichen or Ravitch, who said that was good. And they would send Turi to teach the guy how to use what Ravitch told him to buy. And what we realized was these are the only people who were using our instruments, and our business was disposables, and we were going broke because people would buy the instrument, get excited, and not use it. And so we realized that the only ones that were using it were ones Turi trained. So we got the idea of hiring nurses to teach the technique, and then that graduated into why have a nurse go here and then another go over there and go to the other place. And we said that if the salesman could do what the nurse was doing, he could do both ends of the sale. He can make the sale and he could teach, something never done before. So we created what was the first technical salesperson in the industry. I mean, something that today has been thought twice about. But when we did it, nobody did it.
Well, I appreciate the time, Joe. We're going to take a little break with Lee now. Anything before we close out with this session?
Well, for those who really don't know the U.S. surgical story and the story from Mr. Hirsch, there's not many people who have changed the way everything in the world happens in every operating room twice. Sometimes they get lucky and they do it once. But to bring surgical stapling where there would be 200 to 300,000 people a year would suffer from having a colostomy. And it wasn't until the stapling devices that Mr. Hirsch created and commercialized that it eliminated many of those colostomies, because you can get deep down in the pelvis and staple instead of having to suture. There's so much value, and you see every operating room I go in the world today has surgical stapling. And now we talk about robotics. Well, robotics started with minimally invasive surgery. And it was, the moment the concept of the automatic clip applier came on, Lee Cohen brought the idea to you, if you recall, and talked about getting into laparoscopy. And again, unbelievably talented person in Lee Cohen, and a maverick of a CEO that doesn't say we're not in the laparoscopy business, we're not in the imaging business. He says, make me a clip applier. He said, let's go do it. And it's that initiative. And so the reason why I'm so passionate is not only I have a personal connection, and I'm always forever in debt to Mr. Hirsch, but I got to see firsthand what a passion for taking risk and solving problems can do. And Mr. Hirsch single-handedly revolutionized two industries that most companies in this hall are benefiting from today. And that's the one thing I want everyone to understand is the greatness in this man.
That's nice.
And thank you so much for the platform and allowing us to honor him. So.
Thanks for coming.
All right, thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Very flattering, sir.
Oh, come on.
Be honest.
It's fantastic, sir. So,
Thanks, Joe.
hey, I'll see you a little bit. We're going to do this again?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Love
Thank you,
your
sir.
tie.
Thank you.
Good job,